Hi there everyone, it's Joe and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the Final Fantasy XII starter deck for Final Fantasy trading card game. But first of all I wanted to just let everybody know that I'm actually going to be in Paris this weekend for the Spring Cup for Final Fantasy TCG. So if you guys are within Paris or around the France area and you'd like to come and say hello, then come and say hi over at the weekend, it'd be great to see you. But anyways, without further ado, let's just get straight into the Final Fantasy XII Evolved starter deck. Now this deck, much like the Final Fantasy XIII-2 starter deck that I posted recently, was a little bit more of a struggle, and that's why it's taken me a little bit longer to get this video out than I would have liked. However, I think I figured out the best way to kind of get a deck together quickly and efficiently so that people who want to get into the game can just get straight on in. And there's actually very few water forwards in this deck, so we're going to go start off with them. And the first one is Ashe. And being one of the hero cards in this deck, she is imperative to get down as soon as possible because a lot of the deck does actually revolve around her. Now, a lot of people already know this that are very familiar with the game, but Ashe is a very, very good card in and of herself. She's very difficult to remove from the board through damage, and because she gets bigger every time that she's targeted, and she's still pretty difficult to tap down through ices or lightning shenanigans because she can untap herself at any point, and her S ability is just icing on the cake. Now, with the release of Rasla, who we'll get to later, but I'll quickly, go over now, she's even harder to kill. Now, Rasla is a 2 CP backup who says that Ashe can't be destroyed or broken by card effects. So if you can't damage her outright, and you can't break her outright, there's not an awful lot, or you can't damage her to break her outright, there's not an awful lot you can do to her. So the idea of this deck is basically to try and get her to be as big as possible so that she's as hard to remove off the board as possible. So while you're setting up all your Sky Pirates, that the deck is when it's in the box it's intended to be around Sky Pirates, but we've kind of gone on a little bit of a tangent to support Ashe very well. You can do some crazy things here and have such a big wall up, it's horrible. So 3 copies of Ashe and no less, well, you can't really run less. However, I have run a single copy of the starter deck Ashe because early game, if you have a Sky Pirate out, she's very good at getting your stuff together very quickly because she draws a card when she comes in, and she can be used as S fodder for the other Ashe, so having a 4th copy of it isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then we have copies of Vossler in this deck because, with the fact that we have so much of Ashe going into the deck, it's nice to be able to get a under the curve 3 CP, essentially 8k guy that takes less damage than he should. He actually is a card that I didn't like very much when I first read him, but having tried him, he's actually pretty good. So if you've got, say, Maria down, who again we'll get to later, then you can make him so that he's actually very powerful. Ondor actually helps quite a lot in this deck, despite the fact that Ondor is actually not the best card in the world. Again, the backups support the forwards in this deck very, very heavily, so going over the forwards quickly so that we can get to the backups is where I'm intending to go with this. Now, with the win forward portion of this deck, I've tried to fit in as many Sky Pirates as I possibly can, and the primary reason for that is so that your attacker can be Fran. Now, Fran gets bigger for every Sky Pirate you have on the board, so therefore you want to fit as many as you can into it. So Fran is very easily searched up by Balthier. You could run the other Fran in here, which is a little bit, which is the backup, but then you lose out on a lot of the powerhouses, and I like to try and fit as much of the starter decks into this deck as you can. So therefore, we're wanting to build around Fran as much as possible, and this is the forward one. And then we've got 4 copies of Balthier here, 2 copies from the starter deck and 2 copies from set 2. Now, ideally, you'd like to have the legendary copy of Balthier because he's very, very good anyway, but having a searcher for Fran and something that can pick up a large majority of the forwards in the deck is very, very potent as well. So if we're going to focus on Fran more than Balthier, then having this sort of setup is fine. Though if you do happen to get whole copies of the legendary Balthier, then do try and find a way of working him into the deck because he's actually very, very good. And then we're going into copies of Bartz, who is a character that, the joke is that Bartz has all the jobs, which is, very well known in the community by now. But the fact is that he's a Sky Pirate, which means that he benefits cards like Fran very, very easily. And, he's just very, very potent for his cost. He's probably the first card I would remove from this deck if I were to build it with a full range of cards available to me. But for people who are just starting out, he's very easy to get hold of. And he's one of those cards that can work in a variety of decks in unexpected ways. So it's worth picking copies of him up. And then we're going into the Vaans. backups, and we have 4 copies of Vaan here, 3 copies of the starter deck one, because he comes with the starter deck and he actually can get quite good quite quickly at being able to, you know, reactivate all of your Sky Pirates on entry, which means your Bartzes as well as your Valthiers and your Frans, etc. And then his S ability, if you can ramp up backups very quickly, which you're aiming to do in this deck anyway because you want to get the support down, he can actually kill things pretty easily off the board. And then the last copy of Vaan, it's a hero copy of Vaan, so I tried to restrict the number I had in here because I didn't want to put too many heroes into this deck. So if you guys wanted to try and get more copies of this, he can actually do pretty nasty things with cards like Balthier. So if you play a Vaan and then a Balthier off of it so that you then search cards for, you know, you're paying for your costs, you end up with so much value so quickly, you get a lot out of him. And this Vaan is actually very quickly approaching really competitive status because the sorts of things that you can do with him by, you know, being able to activate 2 backups when he attacks, and the sorts of things that he can bring in. Balthier is one of a massive number of win forwards that's worth pulling down with him. Chocobos are extremely good with Vaan, but in this deck I just kind of wanted to put at least 1 copy in here. But if you can't get hold of the extra copy of him, then you could run one of the more common Vaans from earlier in the game. So, you know, just make sure you're running enough Vaans to be able to get the S abilities off. That's the most important thing, and to capitalise on the fact that we're running Penello in this deck, which searches for him. And then we've got a single copy of Redus in the deck because while he's a Sky Pirate, he's a little bit iffy, but he does make your other guys more powerful, which benefits your Ashes, your Frans, even your Vaans, things like that, so that you can sort of wall break your opponent and start pushing for things. But the thing is with Redus, and the reason I'm only running 1 copy of him, is once you've got him down, he has to swing every turn, which means that you have to be ready to be able to swing every turn if you've got him. That being said, he is a powerhouse. And then lastly, we've got 2 copies of Rex, mainly because it benefits Vaan and he ends up being like quite a value forward anyway. He's not a Sky Pirate, but he's very easy to play, and you know, your opponent's going to think twice about killing him, particularly if you have a 5 CP Vaan out, which then, if they kill your Rex, you end up going, oh okay, I just get 2 guys out then. And then that's just a massive swing in favour for you, because they've then spent resources on actually aiding you, which is a really big deal. I think Rex is actually quite undervalued in combination with the Opus I Vaan, so that's something perhaps to bear in mind for the future. Now going into backups, now the water backups in this deck, there's a lot of room for variation when it comes to these. However, I think it's important that we run a couple of copies of Ondor. Now, on paper, Ondor is crap. He's just terrible. All he does is he's a 2 CP guy that dulls to buff a FF12 guy by 1,000, which isn't a lot. However, in combination with certain aspects of the deck, you can actually use this multiple times in one go. For example, if you have No-No out, which is one of our wind backups, you could dull Ondor to give one of your FF12 guys 1,000 power, then attack with that guy, which then activates No-No's power to reactivate your Ondor and then use it a second time. If you can start using it multiple times in a turn, you can actually get quite a lot of value out of him. It does quite, you know, Vaan is another one that, you know, activates backup, so you can keep doing it. And it does ramp up for a 2 CP card, and you do actually get quite a lot of value out of him. And then Rassler is in here, as I've stated when I was talking about Ashe, purely to make it so that she's more likely to stay alive, because that is your defense. Ashe is your major defensive point, but because she can activate herself on call, you can attack with her as well. If you've got cards like Ondor, Maria, and things like that out so that you can just keep making her bigger and bigger and bigger, then Ashe is going to start really wrecking face quite quickly. I've also put 2 copies of Yuna in here because I always like to play Yuna if I decide to play Cuckoo Lane, which is a 4 CP summon that draws a card, because if it's 3 CP you get that much more out of it. And, you know, Yuna can be the card that you dull to pay for Cuckoo Lane as well. However, if you wanted to change the summon lineup, you could probably quite easily change Yuna out as well. There are tons of good 2 CP water backups now. You have, you know, Green Mage, Artemisian, Astrologian, Scholar. There's tons and tons of them. So honestly, this was just a choice thing. Just pick your favourite 2 CP backup here and just slot it in. And if you're not sure about it, then that's why we put the Yuna in here. And then lastly, for water backups, I put a single copy of Merlwyb in here. As much as there aren't very many water forwards in this deck, you want Ashe as quickly as possible. You could also change this for Badaron from Opus V, which just gives you a little bit more consistency generally, but I decided to go with Merlwyb here. The wind backups are similarly quite, you know, malleable in that Thief, which is a card that I really like from Opus V, it's the only kind of discardy card in the deck. However, being able to look at your opponent's hand and choose a card that you don't want to be there is quite powerful for a 2 CP card, and cards like Archer from Opus 1, which can destroy backups, aren't seeing nearly as much play as they used to. However, you might choose to still like it, in which case there's nothing stopping you. All this deck is a guideline for you guys to start the game, maybe try something out, get into sort of like, you know, the swing of things with the game itself and then explore your own way. This is just kind of a guideline for just starting out. And then we have copies of No-No in here, which in my opinion is a very, very powerful wind backup, and 3 CP backups with passive abilities like Minwoo and No-No don't see as much play as they once did because they're considered a bit slow. However, once No-No gets going, he makes it so your stuff is so much easier to pay for, and you can attack with things just to untap your cards and then just play more. When if people can get hold of legendary copies of Ivalice from Opus V, then the combination of being able to just constantly reactivate your cards gets scary very quickly because your cards just become essentially free, and that's a really powerful thing. And then we have copies of Pinello in here, mainly because like it fits the theme of the deck. It searches up Vaans. It's, you know, it's an EX burst. It's a nice fit for the deck. And then the last hero card we have in here is Maria. Maria is extremely important to this deck and isn't too expensive, so if you're not sure about being able to get hold of copies, then just go online, have a quick look in for Final Fantasy TCG singles. Maria's not particularly expensive anymore, so it's definitely a card worth picking up, and it's a card that's always going to be useful for you, so I definitely suggest it. Now the summons in here are quite standard fare, generally speaking, for water at least, with Leviathan being able to just bounce any card back to its owner's hand, and then Cuchulainn, which is the reason that we're running Una pretty much, just to be able to drop people's power and so you can draw a card. Your guys aren't particularly strong in comparison to a lot of the more competitive decks out there. Like, your power levels do require you to get things like Maria and Redis out, so you kind of want to keep up as much as possible, and being able to surprise your opponent with things like Cuchulainn does wonders. And then lastly, Asura is a card that I wasn't overly sure about, but you know, wind summons are quite a premium thing, especially like the more common ones. There are some great summons in wind, but they tend to be like heroes, legends, that kind of thing. But with Asura, one of the primary reasons I put that in here is because it works really well with Ashe. One of the only ways to realistically kill Ashe is to block her while you're trading power with her. So if you attack with her while she's 8k because you have a Maria out, or 9k because you have an Ondor and a Maria out, then attacking with her and they block with a 9k guy, you don't necessarily want to use the S ability. You could use an Asura instead because it draws a card. You're not paying much for it. They lose their guy and you keep your Ashe. And similarly, if your opponent does something that really does damage Ashe to a point where it would kill her, and that's very, very hard to do, and then you can just nullify it and draw a card for the trouble. So I figured that Asura worked very, very well in this deck with Ashe in particular, though you could easily change this to something like Sylph if you wanted some more tech against ice, because it activates your guy and it gives a power boost across the board, so it's quite useful for that. But I decided to go with Asura. And then lastly, the monsters in here are pretty much designed to just keep your guys sort of alive in ways so that they can succeed in combat. So Adamantoise, you could drop Adamantoise entirely for another water summon or more Tonbreeze or something like that. I like Adamantoise for the same reason I like Asura. Once you've got the Ashe down, and there's a lot of ways of getting Ashe down in this deck, whether you want to run Merlwyb or not, you can just, make it so that she does not move, and it becomes really difficult. The only way to realistically remove her at this point would be a mass board wipe like Shantotto, which, decks do run, but there's something very much to bear in mind, just to not overextend too far. But the nature of the deck is that you want to get as many guys down the board as well, so just be cautious of Shantotto if you're against an Earth deck. And then lastly, Tonbreeze, again, it drops your opponent's power. It drops your opponent's power quite a lot as well if you're really good at using it, and even if you're not, it's a very simple card to use. So therefore, it just makes it so your Frans, your Redis, your Ashe, things like that, it just makes it much, much easier to get them through. If Redis is having to attack every turn, you want to be able to make it so that he keeps attacking every turn, so having cards like Adamantoise and Tonbreeze definitely helps him out with that. And that is the last video for Starter Deck Evolved Volume 3, so we've now covered the Final Fantasy XIV, XIII-2 and XII decks, so I hope you've enjoyed all three of those, and I would very much encourage you to share out these videos with anyone you know who is interested in getting into Final Fantasy trading card game but doesn't really know where to start. So if you want to share this video out amongst your friends, then I would very much love you for it. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because these things always help me out. And thank you very much for watching. That's pretty much it from me. So if you're, like I said earlier, if you're in Paris this weekend for Spring Cup, then I hope to see you there, and I hope to speak to you all again sometime soon. Thanks again. Bye.